Exorcism in Indianapolis, the true horror behind a family's struggle. Last year, Indianapolis Star published a chilling report about a family that lived in constant fear, terrorized by 3 children who were allegedly possessed by demons. The story revolves around Latoya Ammons and her family, whose lives were turned into a waking nightmare as their children exhibited behaviors that could only be described as unnatural. The children, some as young as 9 years old, were seen crawling up walls, darting from room to room with alarming speed, and speaking in deep, guttural voices that did not belong to them. These horrific events were not merely stories or exaggerations. They were confirmed by almost 800 pages of official documents, detailed interviews with police officers, mental health professionals, family members, and even a Catholic priest who was involved in the case. The evidence, as it turned out, painted a picture far more disturbing than the most terrifying horror film. The haunting began in 2011 when Latoya and her children moved into a modest rental home in Indianapolis. It didn't take long before strange things started happening. First, it was the sounds: creaks, whispers, and odd, unsettling noises coming from empty rooms. But it wasn't until the children began to display unexplainable physical behaviors that things took a darker turn. The family's troubles were soon investigated by authorities, and what they uncovered was something that would haunt them for years to come. One of the most terrifying parts of the report focused on the testimony of a nanny who had been hired to care for the children. She described a moment that would forever be etched in her memory. A 9-year-old boy who, out of nowhere, smiled oddly and then proceeded to crawl up the wall backward, defying all logic. His movements were unnatural, disturbing. He climbed until he reached the ceiling, where he inexplicably flipped over and landed back on his feet, as though gravity had no hold over him. The nanny, horrified and frozen in place, was unable to comprehend what she had just witnessed. Her account was just one of many that painted a picture of something far beyond the ordinary. But it wasn't just the strange physical feats that disturbed everyone involved. The children began to exhibit behaviors that left no doubt in the minds of those who witnessed them. Something sinister had taken control of them. In one of the more unsettling testimonies, a 12-year-old girl described how she had been choked by an invisible force. The girl explained that she could feel something tightening around her neck, cutting off her air supply, making it impossible for her to speak or move. She could hear a voice whispering in her ear, cold and threatening, telling her that she would never see her family again, that she was going to die, and that she would be gone for 20 minutes. These were not the words of a frightened child. They were the words of someone or something else. As the possessions progressed, they began to take an increasingly violent and dangerous turn. The children's behavior became more erratic and frightening. The youngest child, in particular, began to lash out, throwing objects, screaming in voices that sounded nothing like his own, and even making threats to harm his family. Latoya Ammons, desperate and terrified for her children, sought help from multiple sources. A local priest, Father Michael Maginot, was called in to perform an exorcism. He reported seeing firsthand the unnatural occurrences, including the children's violent reactions to holy water, the extreme physical changes in their behavior, and the chilling atmosphere that surrounded them. Father Maginot and others involved in the case spoke about the horrific sensations they experienced while conducting the rituals. They described feeling a palpable sense of evil in the air, a heaviness that seemed to weigh them down as they attempted to cleanse the house. The exorcisms were brutal and lasted for days, but they were far from successful. The demonic force seemed to fight back, showing no signs of relenting. Amidst all of this, police officers who had been involved in the investigation also began to experience strange events. One officer, Sergeant Dwayne D. McGuire, spoke of feeling an overwhelming sense of fear as he entered the home. He reported that the house seemed to have a life of its own, with cold spots, doors slamming on their own, and the overwhelming sense that they were being watched by an unseen presence. McGuire said that on one occasion, he witnessed the boy who had crawled up the walls suddenly jerk his head around unnaturally, his eyes blackened and filled with malice. Another officer reported hearing strange noises while on patrol near the house, as if someone or something was whispering just beyond hearing range. Despite the terrifying testimonies and multiple exorcism attempts, the possession was not immediately lifted. The children continued to be tormented by unseen forces, each day more harrowing than the last. Local authorities, unsure of how to proceed, relied on the testimonies of medical professionals, including psychiatrists and psychologists, who concluded that there was a severe psychological element at play. However, even these professionals couldn't explain the children's extraordinary abilities and the sheer terror that surrounded the family. The psychological explanations seemed inadequate in the face of the overwhelming evidence of something much darker at work. As the story continued to unfold, the community began to take notice. The story of the possessed children spread across the media, bringing with it a mix of skepticism and fascination. Some dismissed the entire case as a fabrication or an elaborate hoax. Others believed it was a genuine possession, fueled by the family's desperation to find an explanation for the unexplainable. Regardless of how one interpreted the events, the chilling reports and the eerie nature of the testimonies could not be denied. The Ammons family's torment was not something easily explained away. In the years that followed, Latoya Ammons and her children tried to move on, but their lives were forever scarred by the events they had endured. They moved out of the house in Indianapolis, seeking a fresh start far away from the place that had become synonymous with their darkest fears. But the legacy of their nightmare continued to follow them, and the haunting experiences left a permanent mark on their lives. Despite the many attempts to dismiss or explain away the events, the story of the possessed children remains one of the most chilling and controversial paranormal cases of modern times. The story was eventually immortalized in books, documentaries, and interviews as people continued to debate whether the events truly occurred or if they were simply a product of fear and imagination. However, for Latoya Ammons and her children, there is no doubt about what they lived through. The exorcism in Indianapolis serves as a stark reminder of the darkness that can sometimes take hold of the human soul and the terrifying power that can lurk just beneath the surface of the seemingly ordinary world. It's a horror story that refuses to fade into the background, leaving a trail of questions that will never truly be answered. The fear and the mystery of the Indianapolis exorcism will linger, haunting those who dare to delve too deep into its dark history.